Joan Risch, disappeared 1961. On October 24, 1961, 31-year-old wife and mother of two, Joan Risch disappeared from her residence in Lincoln, Massachusetts. Unknowingly at the time, this case would end up becoming one of the most well-known and complexing unsolved cases to ever strike the state. Joan was born on May 12, 1930, in Brooklyn, New York. At the time, her full name was Joan Carolyn Bard, but at age 10 in 1940, her family decided to move to New Jersey. Unfortunately, her mother and father passed away in what's considered a suspicious house fire. Subsequently, her aunt and uncle formally adopted her, thus taking their last name, Joan Carolyn Natras, and confirming it by an SSN, Social Security number. Life continued on as normal and Joan received a degree in English literature from Wilson College located in Chambersburg, Pennsylvania in 1952. Following her passion, she was able to get a job in a publishing company. At first, she started as a secretary and made her way through the necessary steps to become an editor at Harcourt Brace and World, which eventually led to Thomas Y. Crowell Company in New York. Within 4 years, she met a young man named Martin Risch. The two got married in 1956 and moved to Ridgefield, Connecticut. They had their first child a year later, a girl, Lillian, and Joan proceeded to leave work and become a homemaker instead. In 1959, Joan gave birth once more to a boy, David. While adjusting to the new lifestyle, the happily married couple moved to Lincoln, Massachusetts in April of 1961. Despite the constant moving between states, the transition to Middlesex County went soothingly, and they quickly integrated with the current community. Martin Risch became an executive at Fitchburg Paper Company, and frequently went out of town on business trips. Joan, although managing the home, got actively involved with the League of Women Voters, an organization to help allow women to partake in larger roles for public affairs. Along with this, she expressed the ambition to become a teacher and share her love for literature once her children got older. Life for the couple maintained its pleasure and contentment, but that all changed on October 24, 1961, a few months after relocating to Lincoln, MA. In the early hours on the day of Joan's disappearance, nothing was out of the ordinary or amiss in the slightest. Martin Risch left home earlier than usual to catch an 8 a.m. flight to New York City for business. Joan served breakfast to the children and then asked a nearby neighbor, Barbara Barker, if she wouldn't mind babysitting her 2-year-old son so Joan could run errands in town with her daughter Lillian. At approximately 11 a.m. she was seen arriving back home with her daughter, after attending the dentist and shopping for groceries. According to a few locals, both Joan and her 4-year-old daughter seemed to be quite cheerful, albeit tired from the busy morning. Sometime between 11:15 to 11:45 a.m. a delivery driver for a dry cleaning service arrived at her residence to pick up several of Martin's suits that he regularly had maintenance. At 12 p.m., Joan put her 2-year-old son down for his regular nap in the upstairs room of their home. While David was napping, the neighbor, Barbara, and her 4-year-old son, Douglas, paid a visit to converse while Joan's daughter, Lillian, played with the neighbor's child. This happened on a regular occurrence in their driveways. Shortly after, Barbara went back to her home, but both parents allowed the children to play together. Throughout their playtime, Joan was tending to yard work and using the shears to help keep her garden plants healthy. Afterward, it was near 2 p.m. when she finished. From this point forward, things started becoming peculiar in more ways than one. After finishing taking care of the plants, Joan took her daughter, Lillian, and the neighbor's son, Douglas, across the road back to Barbara's home without her knowledge. Joan then told the two children that she'd be back momentarily. Regrettably, that wasn't the case. At 2:15 p.m., Barbara was in her kitchen and happened to glance out of her window. She saw Joan wearing what appeared to be a trench coat, and running in a haste while carrying an unidentified item in her outstretched arms that was the color red. Since Barbara wasn't aware of the children being back at her home, she merely assumed Joan was playing, and chasing, with the kids. The children remained to play for a substantial amount of time, and eventually, Barbara went outside on her own accord to check up on the kids. Other than Joan not being anywhere in attendance outside, things were relatively normal. At approximately 4 p.m., Barbara guided Lillian back to her home because she intended to go shopping with her son, Douglas. She presumably thought Joan was inside, so after dropping Lillian off, she made her way back home. Moments later, Lillian ran back to Barbara's home and said, "Mommy is gone and the kitchen is covered with red paint." Perplexed by this statement, Barbara went to investigate and confirmed Lillian's concern. Furthermore, Joan's 2-year-old son, David, was crying upstairs in his crib because he needed his diaper changed. Terrified by the scene, she immediately called the police at 4:33 p.m. When authorities arrived at the scene to conduct their investigation, many oddities stood out. In the kitchen, a table was discovered overturned, and also noticeable was the phone generally mounted on the wall was dismantled and thrown into the wastebasket. This itself was strange as well because the trash can was typically under the sink, but it was found propped in the middle of the floor. On the counter an address director was open to a page meant for emergency contacts, but no numbers were recorded. Other items in the trash can were an empty bottle of hard liquor that was finished the previous night between Martin and Joan. However, empty bottles of beer were laying on the pile of trash. This was considered a red flag because there wasn't any beer in the household at the time, and it wasn't bought by Joan in the morning hours in town with her daughter. More evidence uncovered in the kitchen were paper towels strewn about, along with a pair of Joan's 2-year-old son, David's overalls, of which were seemingly used in an attempt to mop up the flooring covered in blood. As the police continued their inspection throughout the home, bloody palm prints and various fingerprints were against various walls. Moreover, drops of blood were found leading from the upstairs to the kitchen, and then traced to Joan's driveway, the location observed by Barbara when glancing out of her window briefly. Here is an image of the scene. The blood throughout the residence was taken for sampling and analysis, which was a positive match for Joan's type O. Unfortunately, no confirmation could be definitely made on whether or not the blood belonged to Joan due to never having a recording of her prints prior to this incident. During the conduction of the investigation, authorities called the hospitals in the area to see if a woman matching Joan's physical description arrived by happenchance or to notify the police immediately if someone matching her physicality checked in for admission. Authorities canvassed the neighborhood and questioned many residents. There were a handful of people who claimed seeing a blue and gray sedan parked in Joan's driveway close to 3 p.m. Others reported that same vehicle, and the unidentified male driving the car, was acting suspicious at a later time, with the possible person of interest getting out of his car in order to cut tree branches from a nearby wooded area, and subsequently placed them inside the vehicle before leaving. However, the investigators dismissed their statements, saying the car that was seen was more than likely an unmarked police vehicle. After their arrival from Barbara's phone call, which happened at 4:30 p.m., despite the valiant effort by witnesses testifying and insisting that the unfamiliar vehicle was there prior to authorities showing up to the home, that particular clue that could possibly have valuable information was never competently pursued. From my knowledge, other witnesses came forward saying they saw a woman that had the same body frame of Joan's walking aimlessly near a construction site where a new highway was in the process of being built. And from their perspective the female was clutching her stomach and there also appeared to be some form of substance on the woman's legs. Some people described it was mud while others stated that it was blood. As for suspects, the police questioned Joan's husband, who was quickly cleared of having any involvement in his wife's disappearance. This was also the conclusion for the neighbors, mailman, and milkman, and also the delivery driver picking up Martin's business suits for dry cleaning. All the avenues pursued by investigators eventually lead to an unfortunate dead end until a reporter for Lincoln, Massachusetts local newspaper, The Fence Viewer went to the public library to research similar cases related to Joan's disappearance. This particular incident led to a very intriguing piece of new evidence. A few months before Joan Risch vanished, there was a list of 25 books checked out from the library by her. Although she was an avid reader with an immense passion for literature, the books Joan were reading consisted of true crime and mystery, particularly dealing with murders and disappearances. Even more staggering was the fact that a certain book Joan had recently read in September titled, Into Thin Air had a plot revolving a woman disappearing from her home, and the only evidence left behind was blood stains in the house that were smeared with towels, almost an exact replica of Joan's vanishing not long after. With this new information, more theories began to arise from neighbors and authorities, but sadly, it essentially was insignificant in propelling Joan Risch's disappearing forward with positive momentum, regardless of the coincidences from her reading material. Nevertheless, the circumstances couldn't be completely ignored entirely. Throughout the many acquaintances Joan made during her brief stay in Lincoln, MA and other areas previously, her personality was different from person to person. Some of her friends described her as an incredibly devoted housewife that loved her family, while others reported her being ambitious and quite unfulfilled in her life as a homemaker. Furthermore, with Joan's troubled childhood with her parents dying and a housewife, rumors started surfacing that she was sexually molested and physically assaulted when she was young. Those rumors could not be confirmed or denied, so using that option as a viable reason for Joan's disappearance had to be put on the back burner. More speculation and gossip started flowing throughout Joan's friends, with some theorizing that due to her fiery ambition to fulfill her happiness and the frustration of being not only a wife, but a mother of 2 children, the suspicious car residing in Joan's driveway that was reported by witnesses, belonged to a local doctor who tried giving her an abortion in secret, so her husband wouldn't find out. Although it is possible, considering that granting a divorce in the 1960s was deemed preposterous unless there was genuine evidence that portrayed of abuse, adultery, or other various faults complicating the sacred vows of marriage. Thus, due to the difficulties and a lack of verification that would allow a divorce, Joan merely staged her own disappearance to start anew. There has not been any shortage of theories and wild assumptions regarding Joan Risch's disappearance, but none have been able to provide adequate answers on what happened that calamitous afternoon on October 24, 1961. Martin Risch and the 2 children continued to move forward in their lives, albeit suffering from the gaping hole of not having answers to the whereabouts of Joan. Lillian and David managed to lead successful lives. Martin, however, adamantly believed his wife was still alive, but suffering from a case of amnesia. He refused to change phone numbers, holding on to hope that Joan might possibly make a phone call. He never remarried, and in 2009, Martin Risch passed away without having any form of closure. The baffling case of Joan Risch remains unsolved. 2. Fred Valentich, disappeared 1978. In 1978, a 20-year-old pilot named Frederick Valentich disappeared. Valentich had been attempting a training flight over the Bass Strait between the Australian mainland and Tasmania. He was driving a Cessna 182 liters, a light aircraft, and was a moderately experienced pilot, clocking roughly 150 hours flying time. On the evening of October 21, Valentich departed for a training flight from Moorabbin to King Island, a 125-mile trek over the Bass Strait. At 7:06 p.m., Valentich radioed the Melbourne Flight Service to report an unidentified aircraft following him at 4,500 feet. The service told him there was no traffic near him at the time. Valentich insisted he could see a large unknown aircraft near him, which appeared to have 4 bright landing lights, all illuminated. He claimed it passed 1,000 feet above him, moving at high speed. For another 5 minutes, he reported the aircraft's movements. He claimed it moved toward him, that he thought the other pilot was toying with him and that it was orbiting above him. The only description, besides the 4 landing lights, that Valentich was able to give was that the aircraft's exterior was a shiny and metallic, and that it had a green light on it. A few minutes after first radioing the Melbourne Flight Service, Fred Valentich reported he was having engine trouble. The radio officials asked him once more to identify the other aircraft. "It isn't an aircraft," he managed to respond, right before the transmission was cut off. The last sound the radio officials heard was a metallic, scraping sound. Radio officials at the Melbourne Flight Service assumed that Valentich had crashed, but an initial sea and air search of the area he was last reported and turned up nothing. The Australian Department of Transport looked into Valentich's disappearance but was unable to find anything. A few scattered reports of civilians seeing planes landing or flying overhead were collected, but in the end, the disappearance was presumed fatal. and the case was closed. But the case was far from over. 5 years after Valentich went missing, an engine cowl flap washed ashore on Flinders Island. The Bureau of Air Safety Investigation noted that the part came from the same type of aircraft Valentich was piloting and that it had serial numbers within the same range as Valentich's plane. After the mysterious disappearance, the public learned from Guido Valentich's, Fred's father, that Valentich was an ardent believer in UFOs and often worried about being attacked by one. It also came out that Valentich had applied twice to the Royal Australian Air Force, and was rejected both times for inadequate educational experience. He was also studying to be a commercial pilot but had failed his examinations twice. He had also received several warnings, after flying once into a restricted zone in Sydney, and twice into clouds. Ufologists jumped on the case immediately, offering claims that he was abducted by aliens. They claimed there are eyewitness accounts of the green lights that Valentich reported seeing moving across the sky in the area he was last reported being. A group in Phoenix, Arizona also believes that a UFO abduction is a likely explanation. The Ground Saucer Watch claims to have photos taken by a plumber that show a fast-moving object moving through the water near the scene of the disappearance. However, the photos have proven to be too blurry to clearly identify the object. The case remained a topic of conversation amongst conspiracy theorists for almost 40 years, though no new information was ever collected until 2014. A UFO action group in Victoria claimed that an unidentified farmer saw a 30-meter aircraft hovering over his farm the morning after Valentich went missing. He also claimed that Fred Valentich's missing aircraft was stuck to the side of the UFO, leaking oil. The only problem is that the Victorian UFO group never learned the name of the farmer. Since 2013, the group has been searching for him but has not yet been successful, despite recurring reports of UFO sightings, and ufologists insisting that Fred Valentich's disappearance is extraterrestrially related. There has been no real explanation of his disappearance, and the mystery continues to haunt Australia's conspiracy theorists today. 3. Malaysia Airlines Flight 370, disappeared 2014. All but one of the 239 people on the doomed Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 had probably been unconscious, incapacitated by the sudden depressurization of the Boeing 777, and had no way of knowing they were on an hours-long, meandering path to their deaths. Along that path, a panel of aviation experts speculated Sunday was a brief but telling detour near Penang, Malaysia, the hometown of Captain Zahir Ahmad Shah. On 2 occasions, whoever was in control of the plane, and was probably the only one awake, tipped the craft to the left. The experts believe Zahir, the plane's pilot, was taking a final look. That is the chilling theory that the team of analysts assembled by Australia's 60 Minutes have posited about the final hours of MH370. The conclusions have not been backed by any official findings from investigations into the mystery surrounding the March 2014 flight, but the experts on the 60 Minutes show sought to draw the most likely scenario of the plane's fate from the little that is known. They suspect that the plane's 2014 disappearance and apparent crash was a suicide by the 53-year-old LD Zahir, and a premeditated act of mass murder. But first, the experts said, they believe that Zahir depressurized the plane, knocking out anyone aboard who wasn't wearing an oxygen mask. That would explain the silence from the plane as it veered wildly off course. No mayday from the craft's radio, no final goodbye texts, no attempt at emergency calls that failed to connect. That would also explain how whoever was in control had time to maneuver the plane to its final location. The wreckage has not been found, though hundreds of millions of dollars have gone into the 4-year search. The secret of what happened in the final moments of the ill-fated flight, and the motive behind it all, probably died with its passengers and pilot, but the 60 Minutes team, which included aviation specialists, the former Australian Transport Safety Bureau chief in charge of investigating MH370's crash, and an oceanographer, put forth what they believe is the most likely theory. The thing that gets discussed the most is that at the point where the pilot turned the transponder off, that he depressurized the airplane, which would disable the passengers, said Larry Vance, a veteran aircraft investigator from Canada. He was killing himself. Unfortunately, He was killing everyone else on board, and he did it deliberately. Zahrie's suspected suicide might explain an oddity about the plane's final flight path, that unexpected turn to the left. Captain Zahrie dipped his wing to see Penang, his hometown. Simon Hardy, a Boeing 777 senior pilot and instructor, said on 60 Minutes, "If you look very carefully, you can see it's actually a turn to the left, and then start a long turn to the right, and then, he does another left turn." So I spent a long time thinking about what this could be, what technical reason is there for this, and, after 2 months, 3 months thinking about this, I finally got the answer. Someone was looking out the window. It might be a long, emotional goodbye, Hardy added, or a short, emotional goodbye to his hometown. Flight 370 disappeared March 8, 2014, shortly after leaving Kuala Lumpur, bound for Beijing. The craft is thought to have crashed in the far southern Indian Ocean. The governments of Malaysia, China and Australia called off the official search in January 2017. The Australian Transport Safety Bureau's final report said authorities were no closer to knowing the reasons for the plane's disappearance or the exact location of its wreckage. But the 60 Minutes experts tried to answer one of the biggest questions surrounding the flight. How could a modern aircraft tracked by radar and satellites simply disappear? Because, they say, Zahrie wanted it to. And the veteran pilot, who had nearly 20,000 hours of flight experience and had built a flight simulator in his home, knew exactly how to do it. For example, at one point, he flew near the border of Malaysia and Thailand, crisscrossing into the airspace of both, Hardy said. But neither country was likely to see the plane as a threat because it was on the edge of their airspace. Both of the controllers aren't bothered about this mysterious aircraft because, oh, it's gone. It's not in our space anymore, Hardy said. If you were commissioning me to do this operation and try to make a 777 disappear, I would do the same thing. As far as I'm concerned, it's very accurate flying, and it did the job. In light of the new analysis, the ATSB should abandon its ghost flight theory about the plane's demise, said Mike Keane, a former military pilot and the former chief pilot at Britain-based EasyJet. According to news.com.au, that theory says the plane was on autopilot and that Zahrie and his co-pilot were incapacitated when the flight crashed. You may recall my observation of complicity to a crime if the ATSB cling to their version of events when they have knowledge to the contrary, Keane told the Australian. Put bluntly, the MH370 crash is undoubtedly a crime of the unlawful killing of 238 innocent people. The Australian government has also been remiss. They should have put pressure on the ATSB to listen, and act, on professional advice from the aviation community. Theories about Zahrie's culpability are not new. Zahrie and co-pilot Farik Abdulhamid were prime suspects in the plane's disappearance from the beginning. According to news.com.au, there were rumors that Zahrie's marriage was ending and that he downed the plane after learning that his wife was about to leave. The news site said. Another theory was that he hijacked the plane in protest of the jailing of Anwar Ibrahim, who was then the opposition leader in Malaysia. A group called the Chinese Martyrs Brigade has also claimed responsibility for the downing, although skeptical officials called this a hoax. 2 men on the plane were flying with phony passports, but one was apparently an asylum seeker, and neither had terrorism links. The theory posited on 60 Minutes has something in common with previous ones about the fate of MH370, said a skeptical Sarah Norton, whose brother, Paul Weeks, died on the plane. They're all guesswork. Basically it's the same as everything else that's happened with this particular flight, Norton told New Zealand news website stuff.co.nz on Tuesday. It's all assumption and supposition and opinion. They have no corroborated facts to back any of it up, and we have never had anything corroborated. The wreckage, of course, might corroborate or dispel theories about what caused the crash, and crews were still looking for it as recently as this year. The latest attempt to discover it was a $70 million effort by a Texas company called Ocean Infinity. According to the Associated Press, the mission scanned 500 square miles a day during a 3-month search. Ocean Infinity chief executive Oliver Plunkett said the company's technology had performed exceptionally well and collected significant amounts of high-quality data. Still, it found no trace of MH370. 4. Cherrie Mahan, disappeared 1985, 34 years ago. High school senior Chris Birkbichler watched media accounts of 8-year-old Cherrie Mahan's disappearance from Cabot, Winfield Township. In the intervening years, a huge local and national search hasn't uncovered evidence about the girl's fate. But just like her family, investigators aren't giving up. Now, Birkbichler is an experienced investigator with the state police's Butler station. He's rechecking some of the properties where tipsters insist her remains are buried. This week, a volunteer group's search dogs and the trooper combed a site off Winfield Road. The dogs didn't find anything related to the Mahan case, but Birkbichler saw an earthen mound that didn't fit with the surrounding terrain. It looked unusual, he said. On Thursday, 6 Mercyhurst College forensic anthropologists and graduate students arrived to check the mound, just to make sure there was nothing there, the trooper said. Mercyhurst professor Dennis C. Dirkmatt didn't make the trip, but said his crew didn't find anything in the test pit they carefully dug. If they had found bone or something, they would have started a detailed dig using forensic and archaeological methods, he said in a phone interview from the Erie College. Birkbichler is not deterred. Despite the age of the case, new information is still coming in. Each time someone writes about the case or puts it on TV, we get new tips, he said. Each one is checked. Birkbichler said he is going over some of the older information and will revisit key sites like the one this week. Cherrie's mother, Janice McKinney of Saxonburg, has been praying for an answer. It seems my knees are flat, she said. Praying is all that I can do. On August 14th, her daughter would be 38, McKinney said. This February it will be 30 years, she said, and I want to do something special. Maybe we will have a prayer vigil at the church. The 4'8", 68-pound Cherrie Mahan hasn't been seen since she stepped off a school bus at her usual stop at Cornplanter and Winfield Roads in Winfield, on February 22, 1985. It wasn't far from her family's home at the foot of a steep, wooded driveway. The search quickly went national. People seemed captivated by the bright-eyed Cherrie. The FBI got involved, and network TV news did stories. The Alkiski Valley girl was the first face on a national direct mail campaign seeking missing children sent on behalf of the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. Those mailers reach at least 84 million people, which often leads to tips that solve cases. This is one of our original cases, said Bob Lowry, vice president of the center's Missing Children Division. A case like this touches the core of the entire community, he said. Cases where you don't really have firm information are the toughest cases for law enforcement, he said. There were no witnesses, no crime scene. There was an absence of facts. In 1985, he said, we didn't have Amber Alerts, surveillance cameras and other things that help to find kids. Children are the most vulnerable when they are going to and from school, he added. Lowry said the center is gratified that state police and others haven't given up the search even though the case is nearing its third decade. Birkbichler said some of the tips deserve another look. The Center for Missing and Exploited Children still gets leads every time Cherrie's case is mentioned. Lowry said there were 17 phone calls or emails received after ads placed in Pennsylvania and other states last month and 29 generated by flyers posted at Walmart stores in March. Lowry said, during the past 29 years, troopers have written more than 4,900 pages of reports about the Mahan case, according to Birkbichler. That doesn't include dozens of photos and related information. The FBI and local police and search agencies also investigated, and many have taken a second or third look. State police will look at some of the evidence again just in case. Maybe this time, Birkbichler said, it will be it. 5. Asha Degree, disappeared 2000. On February 14, 2009-year-old Asha Degree vanished without a trace. Asha lived at home, 34040 Crest Street, Shelby, North Carolina, with her mother Aquila, father Harold, and her 10-year-old brother O'Brien. Before heading to bed, Asha's dad checked on her at 2:30 a.m. and found her asleep in her bed. Asha and her brother O'Brien shared a bedroom. O'Brien said he heard noises in the early morning hours but assumed it was his sister tossing and turning in bed. When Aquila went to wake up her children for school at approximately 6:30 a.m., Asha was nowhere to be found. There was no sign of forced entry, and all of the doors were locked. Two truck drivers reported seeing Asha walking south on North Carolina Highway 18 around a mile from her home between 3:30 a.m. and 4:15 a.m. The truckers saw Asha leave the roadway and disappear out of sight. 3 days after Asha disappeared, her pencil, marker, and Mickey Mouse hair bow were found in a tool shed at Turner's Upholstery, located along North Carolina Highway 18 close to where the truckers spotted Asha. In August 2001, a contractor clearing a lot discovered Asha's book bag. It was double wrapped in black plastic bags and buried more than 26 miles away from her home. It was sent for tests, but the results have never been made public. The authorities and Asha's family searched tirelessly for Asha, but her disappearance remains unsolved. The Cleveland County Sheriff's Office announced 2 new possible clues Monday in the search for Asha Degree, who was 9 when she disappeared from her Shelby home in February 2000. The first clue is a library book from Falston Elementary School in Cleveland County, Jordan Bowen said in a video posted by the sheriff's office. The book, Mseligat's Pool by Dr. Seuss, shows a fish chasing a worm on a hook on its cover. If you, or someone you know, had this Dr. Seuss library book around the time of Asha's disappearance and lost track of it, call us, Bowen said in the video. Library records at the Falston Elementary School Media Center don't go back to the year of Asha's disappearance, Bowen said. Bowen described the second clue as a concert t-shirt from New Kids on the Block, which formed in the 1980s and is currently on tour. The sheriff's office had a broad request for people who recognizes the shirt, asking for calls from anyone who had the shirt or knew someone who did at any time. They declined in a news release to give more information about the 2 clues. The investigation into Asha's disappearance has been open for more than 18 years. In September 2017, an FBI team with special experience in missing children cases joined the investigation. At the time of that announcement, officials said investigators were working on the assumption that Asha is alive. Asha's family last saw her around 2:30 a.m. on February 14, 2000, when she was asleep in her bedroom, officials have said. About 90 minutes later, drivers on NC-18 in Shelby saw her walking on the side of the road, officials said. Her parents reported her missing around 6:30 that morning. In 2001, her backpack was found buried along NC-18 in Burke County, with some belongings still inside, officials said. In May 2016, the FBI announced it was looking for an early 1970s Lincoln Mark IV or Thunderbird, based on a tip that someone who looked like Asha may have gotten into a car like that on NC-18, around the time she disappeared. A $45,000 reward is available for information on the case. According to the Cleveland County Sheriff's Office video, anyone with information on the library book, the shirt or other details can call to the Cleveland County Police. 6. Amy Lynn Bradley, disappeared 1998. In the early morning of March 24, 1998, Amy Lynn Bradley was lounging peacefully on the balcony of her cruise ship's cabin. Her father had woken up between 5:15 a.m. and 5:30 a.m. and noticed her, but decided to let her sleep a little longer. She had been out late the night before, dancing in the ship's nightclub until the early hours of the morning. When he came back at 6 a.m. to check on her, she was gone. In half an hour, Amy Lynn Bradley had managed to disappear, never to be heard from again. 4 days before Bradley's disappearance, the family had boarded the Rhapsody of the Seas, a Caribbean cruise bound for the Antilles. The beginning of the cruise was uneventful as the family awaited docking in Curacao. The night before she disappeared, Bradley and her brother, Brad, visited the ship's nightclub where a live band called Blue Orchid was playing. According to Brad, he had left Amy at the club with one of the band's members, known as Yellow, who claimed he had parted ways with her around 1 a.m. If her father's report of seeing her on the balcony was correct, she was in her cabin for roughly 4 hours before going missing, and disappeared in a very small window of time. When her family found she was missing, they alerted the onboard authorities and begged them not to dock the ship, fearing it would give their daughter's potential kidnapper a chance to escape. The crew allegedly refused to not dock the ship and wouldn't even page Bradley until the ship was at port. Once docked, the ship was thoroughly inspected, though the Bradley family pointed out that many passengers had already left the ship before the search was finished. In addition to the ship, the sea was searched as well, though authorities claimed that as a trained lifeguard, it was unlikely Bradley would have gone overboard without a trace. Based on her brother's account of the evening she disappeared, the Bradley family suspected the crew was involved in her disappearance. Brad claimed that the crew in the nightclub was giving her special attention, which led the family to believe one of them had smuggled her away, off the ship and into sexual slavery. The family's fears of Amy being smuggled away were not unfounded, though the initial investigation leads nowhere. Several tourists and visitors to Curacao have claimed to have seen Amy Lynn Bradley over the years. In August of 1998, 5 months after she went missing, 2 Canadian tourists spotted a woman who matched Amy's description on a beach. The woman even had the same tattoos as Amy, a Tasmanian devil with a basketball on her shoulder, a sun on her lower back, a Chinese symbol on her right ankle, and a lizard on her navel. In 1999, a member of the Navy visited a brothel in Barbados and claimed to have run into Amy, or at least a woman claiming to be her. The sailor claimed that the woman told him her name was Amy Bradley and begged him for help, saying she was not allowed to leave the brothel. 6 years later, a woman claimed to have seen Bradley in a department store restroom in Barbados. To add to the family's distress, in 2005 the Bradley family received an email containing a photo of a woman who appeared to be Amy, lying on a bed in her underwear. A member of an organization that locates sex trafficking victims on adult websites noticed the photo and thought it could be Amy. Today, the investigation into Amy Lynn Bradley's disappearance is ongoing. Though no new leads have popped up, the FBI is offering a reward of up to $25,000 for information leading to the recovery of Amy Lynn Bradley and information that leads to the identification, arrest, and conviction of the persons responsible for her disappearance. 7. Jodi Huisentruit, disappeared 1995. Mason City police are looking into 2 vehicles that may be connected to the disappearance of an Iowa news anchor 24 years ago. According to a new report, Jodi Huisentruit was a 27-year-old anchor at Kim TV in Mason City on June 27, 1995. When she failed to show up for work to anchor the 6 a.m. broadcast, she hasn't been seen since. FindJodi.com, a site dedicated to Huisentruit's case and run by journalists and retired police officers, reported Friday that the Mason City Police Department executed a search warrant on March 20, 2017, for GPS data on 2 cars related to John Vancis. Vancis, now 72 and living in Arizona, was a friend of Huisentruit's who may have been the last person to see her before she vanished. Online court records show police were seeking GPS data from a 1999 Honda Civic and a 2013 GMC 1500. Vancis is listed as the interested party on the warrant, which is under seal. Mason City Police Chief Jeff Brinkley told FindJodi.com that the warrant is connected to the department's investigation into Huisentruit's disappearance. As you know, we continue to actively work Jodi Huisentruit's missing persons case from June 27, 1995. The search warrant you are referring to is part of our ongoing investigation. We do not have any public comment at this time about the content of the search warrant or the persons named in it. We would ask that anyone with information about Jodi's disappearance contact the Mason City Police Department, Brinkley told the website. A Des Moines Register article from August 12, 1995, reported that Huisentruit stopped by Vancis's house on the evening of June 26 and that the two watched a videotape of a birthday party friends had thrown for Huisentruit. She was in good spirits when she left here, Vancis said at the time. Vancis told the Register in 1995 that police interviewed him and gave him a lie detector test, which he passed, but that didn't stop accusations from some in the community. I have been crucified by this community. I have been crucified by the media, he said at the time. I have friends who won't talk to me. Investigators have long believed someone grabbed Huisentruit shortly after 4 a.m. as she went to her red car in the parking lot of her apartment complex. Neighbors said they heard a scream around then and saw a white van in the lot. Police found her red high heels, blow dryer, hairspray and earrings strewn across the lot. Her bent car key lay on the ground near the car, and police believe she was unlocking her car door when she was taken. An unidentified partial palm print was found on her car, but there was no other substantial evidence at the scene.